I never expected to be the one to cover the night shift, but that's the way life works sometimes. I've always worked the day shift at this quiet supermarket, a regular, trustworthy man performing regular, predictable job. My schedule was straightforward. Clock in at 9 a.m., deal with a continuous stream of clients, and leave by 6 p.m. easy. Quite predictable. But yesterday night, everything changed. It was around 8 p.m. I received a call from my manager, Amelia. Amelia has been nothing but lovely to me since I began here. She's a nice woman who understands when someone needs time off or when the schedule has to be adjusted. So, when she phoned and I sensed the desperation in her voice, I didn't hesitate to listen. "Robert," her voice cracked across the phone. "I need you to do me a big favor tonight." I sensed something was wrong straight immediately. I leaned on the kitchen counter at home, looking at my leftover food. "Sure, Amelia. What's going on?" "Well, it's about Richard." Her pause was weighty, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "The night shift guy. He's not answering his phone, and nobody saw him leave this morning." I frowned. "Richard?" He'd been working the night shift for a few months now. Quiet guy. Kept to himself, but never struck me as unreliable. Maybe he's just sleeping in. Forgot to charge his phone. "I wish it were that simple," Amelia murmured. I checked the cameras. "Robert, he didn't leave the store." "What do you mean he didn't leave?" "I mean," she said, her voice lowering to nearly a whisper. "He was here at 6 a.m. when the morning shift arrived, but then nothing. He was gone. It's like he vanished." My heart skips a beat. This was becoming odd. "So you need me to cover for him tonight?" "Just this once." She reassured me. "I know it's short notice, but you're the only one who's free. Please, Robert, I'll owe you big time." Something about her voice made me apprehensive, but I consented. Amelia had been kind to me, and I didn't want to abandon her. What was the worst that might happen during a peaceful night shift? "I'll do it," I eventually said, but only this once. Amelia breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Robert, the first OU." By 10:30 p.m., I was on my way to the grocery store, mentally prepared for what I expected to be a long, monotonous night. The business was on the outskirts of town, situated in a peaceful suburban area. It was one of those locales that saw little motion, especially at night. I assumed I'd be alone for much of my shift. As I reached the rear entry, I observed something unusual. The employee door, which was always secured at this time of night, had been blown open. A burst of wind rocked it back and forth on its hinges, producing an unsettling creaking sound. Then I saw him. Richard. He stood just inside the threshold, quivering like a leaf in the breeze. His eyes were big, bloodshot, and full of something I couldn't quite identify. Terror, perhaps. He appeared to have not slept in days, his face pallid and haggard. "Richard?" I said, bewildered rather than alarmed. "What the hell are you doing out here? The manager's been looking for you." Richard did not answer immediately. He lurched towards me, his steps wobbly. When he came near enough, I could see sweat on his forehead despite the chilly night air. "Robert," he rasped, unable to form the words. Don't cover the night shift." I blinked, surprised by the intensity in his words. What are you talking about?" "You don't understand," he said, raking his hand through his tousled hair. "This place, it's not what it seems. You don't want to be here at night. Trust me." I couldn't help feeling furious. Richard had always been a little off, but this was too much. "Come on, man. You're freaking out. Maybe you just need a few days off." He grasped my arm, his grip surprisingly firm for someone who appeared so fragile. "No, I'm serious. Don't stay." I glanced at him, perplexed, and he went on. "But if you do stay, check the last drawer of the counter. There's something there that will help you. And for God's sake, leave at 6 a.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later." "Richard, listen to me. I'm not going back in there." He interrupted with a forceful shake of his head. "Not ever." Then, before I could say anything further, Richard raced into the darkness as if his life depended on it. I stood for a few seconds, watching Richard go into the darkness. His conduct was odd, but I attributed it to tiredness. He had most likely been exhausted from working late hours. People who are sleep-deprived do not always think clearly. Still, something about his warning lingered in the back of my mind. When I eventually entered the store, Sarah, the day shift cashier, was about to go. She gave me a weary grin, but I could sense relief on her face. She was more than prepared to clock out. "Hey, Robert," she yawned. "Thank you for covering tonight." "No problem," I said, looking around. "By the way, did you see Richard earlier? He was acting kind of strange." Sarah lifted her eyebrow. "Richard?" "No, I didn't see him." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He was just outside a minute ago, freaking out about something," she explained, shaking her head, plainly perplexed. "I didn't see anyone, and I've been here the whole time." A shiver rushed down my spine, but I pushed myself to ignore it. Weird. Maybe he was hiding out somewhere. Maybe, Sarah said, doubtful. "Well, good luck tonight. It's usually dead quiet," she said, chewing her lip as if she wanted to add more. "But what?" "Nothing," she hastily replied, snatching her coat. "Just don't let it get to you. See you tomorrow." And then she went, leaving me alone in the calm, fluorescent lit store. The initial few minutes were unremarkable. A few customers walked in, purchasing late-night munchies or picking up stuff they had forgotten. I perused their merchandise, made small chat, and settled into what I assumed would be a simple shift. Around 11:30 p.m., the shop became utterly silent. There were no more customers or automobiles going by outside, just me and the hum of the freezers. I started to relax, thinking that this night shifting might not be that horrible after all. But then, as I sat behind the counter, I spotted something strange at the far end of the store in the poorly lighted aisles. There was a figure, a customer, perhaps, but they weren't moving, just standing there between two aisles, as if they were waiting for something. "Hello," I said, staring into the black aisles. No answer. The person remained motionless at the far end of the store, where the lighting was dim, producing long, spooky shadows between the shelves. I squinted, trying to make out any features, but it was difficult to determine if it was a person or my imagination playing tricks on me. The store was quiet save for the gentle hum of the freezers and the low buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Hello," I said, louder this time. No answer. The figure did not move. It was uncomfortable, but I assured myself it was only a client lurking in the shadows, maybe deciding on a late-night snack. I moved my focus to the security monitor, hoping to get a closer look at whoever it was. Oddly, the camera with a direct view of that aisle showed nothing but vacant aisles and shelves stocked with merchandise, with no one in sight. I scowled and looked back up at the aisle, and my heart skipped a beat. The figure had moved. It was closer now, barely past the badly lighted portion, yet it remained strangely motionless. My gaze returned to the monitor. Still nothing. The figure was not there. It did not make sense. I shook my eyes, attempting to shake off the discomfort that had settled deep in my stomach. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or perhaps they were standing in the camera's blind region. That has to be it. But when I looked back down the aisle, the person had shifted again. This time is considerably closer. It now stood in better daylight, yet the shadows clung to them. I couldn't make out a face, only a faint outline of a person. They stood there unnervingly motionless, as if expecting something. My body moved before I could control it. I stepped up from behind the desk and made my way down the aisle. As soon as I turned the corner and entered the aisle, nothing. No one was present. I stood motionless for a while, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. The shop was vacant. I was the only one there. I walked through each aisle methodically, looking for any signs of someone having been there. But nobody was inside. I eventually returned to the counter, convincing myself that whoever was had departed the store quietly. I examined the cameras again. They were clear. with no evidence of activity. And then I recalled what Richard had told me. The drawer. I paused, staring at the display again. Midnight had just passed, and the place felt even quieter, with stillness pressing down on me. I reluctantly opened the last drawer beneath the counter, hoping to find some keys or supplies. Instead, my fingertips touched a folded piece of paper. I opened it and read the first few paragraphs. Here are the guidelines you must follow to make it through the night shift. I learned about them the hard way, therefore I've included all of them here to keep the new night shift clerk safe. Please take note of any weird events you encounter. I rolled my eyes, assuming it was some elaborate prank by Richard or one of my co-workers. Still, I couldn't get over Richard's seriousness when he warned me earlier. His voice lingered in my thoughts, as did his worn, worried countenance. I proceeded to read the list. Occasionally, you'll notice a dark person at the far end of the store, standing between two aisles. It won't move if you ignore it. Always recognize its presence by nodding or waving, and it will leave you alone. I felt a sudden surge of terror, and before I could stop myself, I screamed into the empty store. Yeah, real funny guys, really mature. My voice reverberated down the aisles, but the store remained motionless, as if waiting. I continued reading. From 2 a.m., aisle 7 gradually changes. Products are shuffled. The air becomes colder, and odd creatures begin to appear. Sure, I said, rolling my eyes again. This had to be a strange initiation prank for covering the night shift. As I continued reading, a peculiar discomfort sank into my bones. Around 1 a.m., at 4 a.m., just 5 customers are allowed to enter the store. After the 6th, any subsequent clients, regardless of appearance, are not human. Count them carefully, and if a 6th arrives, lock yourself in the back office and do not exit until you are certain they have left. My eyes widened when I read that one. I forced myself to continue reading. No matter what, aisle 3 must be cleaned by 2:45 a.m. Every night, a spill will occur on the floor unexpectedly, and you must wipe it up as soon as you see it. Ignoring it will allow the spill to spread, and you'll soon find wet footprints throughout the business. I chuckled uncomfortably. This was becoming crazy. If the rear door is not locked, someone or something will enter after midnight. You won't notice them, but you'll get a strange shiver as if someone is standing behind you. I reflexively looked behind me at the back door, which I had left open, assuming no one would bother coming through. We didn't lock it during the day, so why bother at night? The following regulation drove another shock of fear through me. Occasionally, you may catch a glimpse of yourself wandering the aisles, stacking shelves, or wiping the floors. Whatever you do, do not approach them or let them see you. A feeling of worry developed in the pit of my stomach. I tried to shrug it off, but the fact was that the list was getting to me. I continued to read, my fingers shaking. If you hear weeping or calls for aid from the manager's office, do not enter. The door may be ajar. The wailing will become louder as you approach, and if you open the door, it will cease. Something else will wait in the solitude. I shoved the list back into the drawer, hoping to forget about it, when something in the corner of my eye caused me to pause. A shadow flashed across the surveillance monitor near the back door. I had to make sure no one had entered. I dashed to the back door, expecting to see one of my co-workers creeping around attempting to terrify me, but no one was there. The air seemed unusually chilly as a draft swept in through the still open back door. I slammed it shut, sending a shudder up my neck. I locked it right as I turned around. There was a gentle knock at the door. A cold sweat formed on my skin, and I slowly turned back toward the entrance. I opened it, expecting one of my colleagues to leap out and startle me, but no one was there. The rear alley was deserted. I walked outdoors and looked around. Nothing, not a soul. I shut and closed the door. As I returned to the counter, my heart skipped a beat. I sensed a chilly, frigid presence behind me, so palpable that I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck. I whirled around and saw nothing except the wall. I stood there, breathing deeply. Rule 5 rang through my head. I felt someone observing me. I needed to get a handle on myself and shrug off the dread that clung to my skin. Standing stationary behind the counter didn't help. The regulations were uncomfortable, but they were only words on paper. I needed to walk about, clear my mind, and remember that this was simply a calm, empty shop. I decided to take a brief trip through the aisles and maybe refill a few goods to keep myself occupied. The usual pattern would center me and prevent me from drifting farther into paranoia. As I proceeded along the aisles, everything appeared normal at first. The customary aisles of snacks, canned foods, and drinks were neatly packed in their respective positions. But as I made my way to the freezers at the rear of the store, something drew my attention. An ice cream carton was laying on the floor just in front of the freezer doors. It was still sealed and totally undamaged, yet it was resting there as if someone had dropped it. I scowled. No one had been in this part in a while, and the few customers I had earlier didn't even go near the freezers. I went down to pick it up, convincing myself it was nothing. I rose up, carton in hand, and reached out to open the freezer door, only to find something cold and solid wrapped around my wrist. The sensation was all too real, but there was nothing apparent to anchor me. I snatched my hand back, drawing it to my chest as I lurched backward. My gaze flew across the freezer aisle. There was no one here, yet I felt something grab me. I glanced at my hand, my skin tingling where the grasp had been, and small crimson lines traced the outline of those fingers. They were thin, with just 3 clear patterns, as if the hand that gripped me had 3 fingers. What the hell? I murmured to myself, but my voice was muffled by the weird atmosphere. I ran back, my palms still quivering from the cold contact. The small red lines on my wrist remained, burning slightly, like if whatever had touched me had left a trace that went deeper than the surface. When I got to the counter, I leaned against it, breathing rapidly, my pulse rushing in my chest. I couldn't get over the feeling of chilly, tiny fingers clutching my wrist. I was still looking at my hand when something moved in the corner of my eye. My head jumped up, eyes racing toward the rear of the shop, and there it was again, the same person, standing between the aisles and the dimly lit part. Its form was veiled by shadows, but I recognized it as the same person from earlier, the uncomfortable presence I had seen but told myself was not real. It was standing there, gazing at me and without moving. This time, I felt terror coming in faster. Rule number 1. Recognize its existence by nodding or waving, and it will leave you alone. Was this actually happening? I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat making breathing tough. I cautiously extended my arm and waved at the shadowy person at the end of the aisle. The figure did not move, stride forward, or shift in any manner. But suddenly its face, or what passed for a face, brightened with an unsettling broad grin. The smile was absurdly broad, spanning from ear to ear, with teeth sparkling unnaturally in the low light. It was not a joyful or friendly smile. Rather, it was too harsh and predatory. It gave off a faint, strange glow, as if the grin itself were formed of something alien. And suddenly the figure disappeared. I stood there, locked in place, my mind unable to process what had just transpired. This was not my imagination. Something was occurring, and it was far worse than I had anticipated. "Oh my God!" I murmured, my heart beating faster than ever. I wasn't sure what to do. My legs felt weak, and my thoughts raced. With shaky hands, I opened the drawer again, the tiny creak of it sending my heart racing. I dug inside, feeling the familiar scratchy texture of the folded paper, the rule book. I had to double-check it to ensure I hadn't overlooked anything important. My head was racing from what had just happened, but I needed something solid to cling on to, even if it was only a set of strange, unpleasant rules. As I opened the paper, the front door rang. I flinched, my nerves still on edge, but it was just a client, a middle-aged man. He appeared normal enough. I took a nervous breath, attempting to relax myself. "It's all right, just another customer," I reasoned, attempting to get my heart rate to normal. He gave me a short nod before walking deeper inside the store. I gave him a brief glance before returning my focus to the list, clutching it like a lifeline. "Okay," I mumbled under my breath while perusing the guidelines. "Count the customers between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. No more than 5. I looked at the clock on the wall, which was just past 1 a.m. So yet only one middle-aged man had entered. Customer number 1. I needed to keep track. There is no space for errors. At 2:45 a.m., clean aisle 3. I exhaled. It appeared straightforward in principle, but after what had transpired tonight, nothing felt simple anymore. However, the market was not big. I could count a few customers and tidy a single aisle. I repeated the instructions to myself as a mantra, hoping to find solace in the ritual. Another client strolled in as the middle-aged guy completed checking out, wishing me a good night before taking his bag and leaving. I saw him pass through the automated doors and disappear into the darkness. "That's 2, I considered. I mentally added the new arrival to the total. The woman who came in next did not look at me. She didn't say anything. She strode straight ahead, her gaze fixed in a remote, unblinking look. Her motions were rigid and mechanical, as if she were being controlled. Her skin, pale and almost impossibly smooth, shimmered under the store's fluorescent lights, as if it wasn't flesh at all but something else, something synthetic. I saw her disappear down one of the aisles, breaking the line of sight. My breath became locked in my throat. It took everything in me not to follow her, to check if she was genuine or something else completely, but I shook my head and forced myself to remain behind the counter. "It's nothing," I said quietly to myself, trying to seem convincing. "Just a strange customer." I looked at the clock again. It was just after 2 a.m. Aisle 7 was the next dangerous area. According to the regulations, I had to avoid it for the rest of the night, which seemed like the simplest thing in the world in comparison to what I just experienced. I checked the security monitor and looked at the dull view of aisle 7, and everything appeared fine at approximately 2:30 a.m. The door chimed again. I turned to see another customer enter, this time a male. This one appeared normal. He went around the aisles, grabbing a few products. I heaved a tiny sigh of relief, thankful that he appeared average. But something nagged at me. The third customer, the woman with robotic gestures. I had not seen her go. My gaze returned to the display, and I moved between the various camera positions. Nothing. There is no indication of her anywhere in the store. Maybe she went and I didn't notice. I reasoned with myself, but the pit in my gut got deeper. There are 4 clients presently. I mentally checked them off, hoping and praying that no more would arrive before 4 a.m. I couldn't handle the thought of facing a 6th customer. I observed the newest client as he checked out with his purchases and walked away, saying a courteous goodnight. I reminded myself at 4 a.m. The minutes passed slowly, stretching like hours. Then my focus shifted to the time. It was almost 2:45 a.m. Time to scrub aisle 3, I reasoned, fear sinking into my belly like a stone. I took the mop and bucket from the back room and carefully made my way down the aisle. My footsteps reverberated throughout the quiet store, and the squeal of the mop bucket's wheels was unervingly loud. But just as I neared the aisle, I heard a faint and faraway voice. I froze, grasping the mop's handle. The sound appeared to travel through the air, faint yet distinct. It called my name. I turned slowly. The whisper became clearer and more persistent. My heart hammered in my chest, each pulse echoing in my ears. The sound was coming from the opposite side of the shop, near aisle 7. My legs felt like lead as I proceeded toward the music, each step hesitant. Yet something pushed me ahead. The murmur became stronger as I approached, my name repeated like a faraway cry. I reached the edge of aisle 7, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew I shouldn't look, but something took over, a terrible fascination that compelled me to peer over the corner. What I saw caused my blood to freeze. The aisle was no longer normal. Mannequins stood strewn around, posing as if shopping, with stiff limbs clad in shabby apparel. Their synthetic features were blank, yet they exuded an unspoken threat that I couldn't explain. It was as if they had been caught in mid-action, and the moment I glanced, they froze in place. I drew back, my heart pounding in my chest. I could not believe what I had just witnessed. I took a breath and glanced again, despite my instincts to the contrary. This time, every mannequin was gazing right at me. I lurched back, my hands trembling and my heart pounding in my ears. My body screamed for me to go, but my feet remained stationary, paralyzed in horror. I did not want to trust what I was witnessing. And suddenly, at the far end of the aisle, I saw her. Customer number 3, the woman with robotic motions. She stood at the end of the aisle, gazing at me with a blank expression. My heart fell to my stomach. She was there. She suddenly moved. No! She rushed at me, her body jerking unnaturally and her limbs flailing in the same artificial rhythm. I let out a strangled shriek and sprinted, dashing as fast as could away from aisle 7. Her heavy footsteps became louder and quicker. As the sound of footsteps approached the edge of the aisle, they came to a halt. I whipped around, but there was no trace of her or any sound. I rushed back to the counter, panting for oxygen. My hands rushed to the security monitor, my fingers quivering as I scrolled through the cameras. Aisle 7 seemed normal on the feed. There were no mannequins or women, only an empty, peaceful aisle. And then, from deep within the store, I heard my name again. This time, I wasn't playing this game. I looked at the clock. It was after 2:45 a.m., aisle 3. I need to clean island 3. I grabbed the mop and bucket, my legs shaky beneath me. I sprinted toward aisle 3, fear rising in my gut as I approached. My heart sunk more. There was a puddle of something on the floor, a thick, black liquid that glistened in the store's fluorescent lighting. Worse, I noticed moist footsteps moving away from the puddle, small and childlike, to the far end of the aisle. I did not have time to think. I've simply relocated. I dashed toward the spill, submerging the mop in the dark liquid and frantically scouring the floor. My hands shook as I worked, and my breath came in rapid gasps. What's this? I thought, terror gripping my head. What is causing these footprints? I cleaned and scrubbed while my heart pounded in my ears. The footsteps led to the end of the aisle, but as I approached, they came to a halt, just around the bend, vanished, as if whomever or whatever had abandoned them had simply evaporated. I looked down at the now clean floor, my hands quivering around the mop's handle. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I wasn't sure what was genuine. I left the mop and bucket behind and walked back to the counter, fatigued both physically and psychologically. Terrified, I slumped against the counter, gasping for air. I kept looking over my shoulder, almost expecting something to appear from the darkness. I remembered how weary and worried Richard had been when he warned me to create that list of regulations. He must have gone through everything, experienced each and every one of these horrible events. A part of me wondered how he had gotten through it. Another part of me wasn't convinced he had. It was almost 4 a.m., and I believed I had finished Rule 3, counting customers. I lost track sometime along the line between the weird incidents. My thoughts had been all over the place, going from one uncomfortable experience to the next. The stress of the night had thrown off my concentration. I attempted to piece everything back together, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no idea how many customers had come in. The entry door chimed, jolting me out of my thoughts. My gaze shifted toward the entrance, and in strolled a lone client. He was covered up in a big winter coat with the hood drawn low over his face, which was unusual. Something about him instantly put me on edge. The way he moved slowly and aimlessly, as if he had no actual purpose in the store. He didn't turn around and didn't recognize me. He merely strolled around the aisles, without picking up anything. I observed him closely, my nerves tense, trying to figure out if he was the fifth customer or anything else. The rule came back to mind. Any further customers after the fifth are not human. If a sixth person enters, lock yourself inside the back office. My heart raced in my chest. Was this the fifth customer? The night had become a haze of anxiety and uncertainty, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. As I glanced at the man, I saw something odd. His reflection in the store's enormous front windows. It wasn't correct. The image wavered and faded in and out like a damaged video feed. The movements were twisted and out of sync with his actual physique. My gut turned with dread. The man abruptly came to a halt and stood still. He slowly turned to face me, and I could feel his stare through the shadows of the hood. Too pale. Ghostly eyes looked out of the darkness, focusing on me. He didn't blink or move, but looked, and it seemed as if they were peering directly into my soul, seeing something in me that no one should ever see. Panic struck me like a freight train. I rushed off the counter, my legs moving instinctively. I didn't care who he was. I just knew I had to get away. My pulse pounded in my chest as I dashed to the back office, my footsteps booming throughout the empty store. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to find the client far behind me, but he was much closer, gliding over the floor without moving his legs, almost like a statue being carried. His eyes remained riveted on mine, unblinking. I pushed myself harder, dashing down the aisles to the rear office. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing in short breaths. Silence engulfed me like a smothering blanket, with just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then a low-pitched hum began to resonate through the walls. It was mild at first, hardly discernible, but it gradually became stronger, echoing from behind the door like an electrical charge building up in the air. I swallowed, straining my ear to the door, attempting to make sense of everything. My body was frozen in panic, my breathing short and silent, and I didn't dare to make a sound. The hum continued for what seemed like an age, infusing the air with foreboding tension. Then it faded away. The hush returned, heavy and oppressive, as if the entire store was holding its breath. I remained there for what seemed like hours, too scared to move, my back pushed against the door, waiting for anything to occur. The only thing that greeted me was the awful, oppressive silence of the night. Eventually, the dread subsided and curiosity took over. I haven't heard anything in a while. I grabbed for the door handle slowly and gently, turning it with my shaky fingers. I cautiously opened the door and looked into the store. Everything appeared normal. The aisles were vacant, with lights humming softly overhead. There was no trace of the consumer, nor was there any unusual activity. But I knew better than to believe looks. Now nothing felt right. I returned to the counter, the night's tension still vibrating beneath my skin, but a sense of relaxation was beginning to sneak in. I peered at the monitor again, scanning the vacant aisles. The store was vacant, exactly how it should be. One more hour, one more stretch, and I'd be free of this nightmare forever. I kept looking at the clock, the minutes passing away. It was slowly coming to an end, just a little longer, and I'd be walking out of here, never to work the night shift again. The weight on my shoulders gradually lightened with each passing second. It was around 6 a.m. I assumed there had been no clients in the past few hours. The store had been unusually quiet, and I appreciated it. The fewer consumers, the less potential issues. Then, just as I was starting to sense a glimmer of optimism, a faint knock came from the rear door. I froze, my thoughts whirling. I looked at the clock. It was 5:50 a.m. I had 10 minutes till I could depart. I paused. The knock came back, harder this time. I proceeded reluctantly toward the rear door, taking each step slowly and cautiously. I unlocked it and gently opened it. Standing there, smiling, was one of my day's shift co-workers. "Hey," he remarked nonchalantly. "How was the night? You look like you've seen something." I gazed at him, feeling a knot of dread rise in my gut. "Yeah," I said. my tone lifeless. You could say that he moved near the counter. As he stood there, I couldn't shake the impression that something was off. The sensation of approaching dread weighed on me, and my heart started racing again. I looked around the dimly lighted store, my nerves on edge. The lights flickered briefly before going off completely. The shop was completely dark, and my breath stuck in my throat. It was still dark outside, far too early for morning, and the store felt sealed off from the rest of the world. My pulse accelerated as I realized the electricity had gone out. I took a flashlight from the back office and turned it on in the oppressive blackness. I dashed to the counter to check on my colleague, but he had already left. I checked the aisles with the flashlight, but saw no trace of him. My pulse hammered in my chest as I dashed towards the door, my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a sword. But when I got to the front door, it wouldn't open. I turned and shone the flashlight through the glass. The world outside was not simply dark, but void and abyss. The light from my flashlight did not penetrate it at all. It seemed as if darkness swallowed up the brightness, devouring everything beyond the store's doorway. I could not see anything. There are no buildings, no street lights, nothing. The clock on the wall attracted my attention, and my stomach fell. It was 6:02 a.m. Richard instructed me to depart at 6 a.m. sharp, not earlier or later. I felt terror rise in my throat as the reality dawned on me. I'd made a terrible mistake. I started sprinting throughout the store, desperately trying to figure out what to do. I had no strategy, no understanding what was going on, and I needed to get away. The store seemed strange now, like if the walls were closing in. The aisles appeared to extend and bend in ways that defied sense. Whispers, murmurs, and faraway tears resonated across the area. I could hear the mannequin woman from before, her rigid artificial movements moving across the aisles behind me. The man wearing the winter coat walked silently, his sunken eyes still seeking. I had no idea what was real anymore or how long I had been running. The shop was altering and rearranging. The aisles no longer followed the laws of space and time. My breath came in short, frightened gasps as the voices became louder, and the walls appeared to pulse about me. I rounded a corner and found myself back where I had begun. No matter which way I ran, everything looped indefinitely. Time was passing away, too. My mind battled to hang on to moments and determine whether seconds or hours had passed. I yelled, but I wasn't sure if any sound came out. Everything blurred together as my motions got more frenetic. My body felt weightless, as if I were floating amid the mayhem, caught in a never-ending cycle of repeated aisles and shifting shadows. Suddenly, I found myself in the back of the business, right next to the back door. My hands shook as I grabbed for the handle. I pushed it open, rushing out into the chilly night air. The world outside remained dark, but it was the normal darkness of early night, rather than the emptiness I had seen before. I looked at my watch, my heart racing in my ears. It was 11 p.m. With trembling palms, I delved into my pocket for a pen and the list of regulations. My palms shook as I penned the final entry. Rule 8. Whatever you do, exit the supermarket by 6 a.m. sharp, not a minute sooner or later. If you don't, the store will feel different, as if it has been locked off from the outside world. The aisles will move and expand, and odd creatures will wander around the store. You'll be locked with them till nightfall again. I gazed at the notice, my heart sinking as I understood how serious the regulations were. I looked down at my hand, the same hand that had felt the frigid grasp earlier, and noticed that the 3 finger marks were still faintly visible on my flesh. This was genuine, every aspect of it. As I stood there, one of my co-workers approached the rear of the store and casually waved at me. "Hey, everyone's been looking for you," he remarked as if nothing had happened. "You all right?" I did not react. I wasn't sure how to describe what had happened. "I'm taking the night shift tonight," he said. "Is there anything I should know?" I swallowed hard before pulling out the list of regulations and giving it to him. "This is not a joke," I said, barely above a whisper. "Read them. Follow them exactly." He stared at me, puzzled, but I didn't wait for his reaction. I just turned and walked away, my steps heavy with the weight of what had happened. I knew I couldn't explain it to him or convince him of what was coming. I left the grocery, knowing I'd never return. Not during the day, and especially not at night. Never again.